Shalom and welcome to the Rabbi Avi Show. What does it take for a man to leave a quiet life that began on a 1,500-acre sheep farm in New Zealand for a hilltop community near the biblical heartland of Hebron? What is the journey from being a shepherd in the fields of the South Pacific to becoming a spiritual leader in both America and Israel? In a world of headlines and hot takes, it's rare to get an honest, on-the-ground perspective of what life is really like in Israel, especially in the places we hear about the most but often understand the least. Today, I have the honor of reconnecting with a dear friend and a remarkable individual, Rabbi Yossi Etz-Hasadeh. Rabbi Yossi's story is one of profound transformation. His path has taken him from the remote plains of New Zealand to the bustling world of the Israeli high-tech, from leading a community in California to building a home for his children and grandchildren in Judea. In our conversation, Rabbi Yossi paints a vivid picture of a life deeply connected to the seasons and the soil. We talk about the very personal reasons he made Aliyah, what it truly means to be part of the miraculous story of Israel. And he gives us a rare and candid look at the daily realities of life in the Har Hevron region, sharing his personal experiences of working alongside his Arab neighbors and challenging the distorted narratives we so often see in the media. This is a conversation that spans continents and cultures, and it all begins on a farm on the other side of the world. All right, Rabbi Yossi Etz-Hasadeh, my dear friend, it's so wonderful to have you on the Rabbi Avi Show. For my listeners who don't know, our friendship goes back to your time as the beloved rabbi of the Orthodox Synagogue in Sacramento in the early 2000s, and it's a real pleasure to reconnect like this. Before we dive into your life in Israel today, I want to start at the very beginning. You have one of the more unique backstories of any rabbi that I know. Paint a picture for us. What was it like growing up on a farm in New Zealand?
Yeah, so before I start to answer, Rabbi, I appreciate very much you being in touch with me and catching up again. We have really good memories of you and your family back in Sacramento, and it's hard to believe it's been so long. But New Zealand. So just for those listening who might not know where New Zealand is, New Zealand's tucked in next to Australia out in the Pacific. It's a country about the size of England, and it's about 25 hours flight from Israel. My family have been there for maybe 4 generations, and I grew up on the farm that had been in the family at least until my 30s, and when my father passed away. I'm the eldest of 4, myself, a brother, and 2 sisters, and we lived in the South Island in a province called Canterbury, which is a large agricultural plain. And I grew up on a small, what's called in New Zealand at least, a small farm, cropping and sheep. So crops in the summertime, sheep in the wintertime. Although you're looking after the sheep all year round, but that's kind of the cycle. It's a 1,500-acre farm. The nearest neighbor was a couple of miles away. Nearest small town about 3 miles away. Nearest city was 40 miles away. So it's kind of pretty isolated. And so, looking back, hard to kind of evaluate when you're living this situation, but looking back, one of the things I really appreciated and I think shaped who I am today was growing up in an environment where you're so in touch with nature and the cycle of the seasons. Just give a couple of anecdotes, perhaps to help people understand. One is a memory of caring for the sheep. I have lots of these, but I'm just going to pick one. In the wintertime, it's typically when they're giving birth. And so having to go out in the middle of the night when it's freezing cold and there's a storm going, and to help some of the animals give birth, uh, to pick up the lambs and take them home when they couldn't be supported by their mother, and look after them in the home, feed them, and so on. That's one kind of memory. Another is related to the harvest. You know, you have to prepare the ground. So one of the things you do is you sit on a tractor for most of the day plowing the soil. So, you know, those days there's no music to listen to, nothing. It's just you and the world around about, the roar of the engine of a tractor and the smell of the freshly tilled soil. Um, kind of those are the kind of memories and the kind of environment that I grew up in. And I have one distinct memory in conclusion to answer this question is, you know, sitting around the table in at home, and the fridge nearby, and on top of the fridge was this old Philips radio. And I remember very distinctly my father shushing everyone because he was wanting to listen to the BBC report on the Six-Day War. So I was probably 9, but it was a very distinct memory, and that's the kind of environment I grew up in.
It's almost like part of that is you're a shepherd, not unlike Moshe Rabbeinu in that sense. So there's a connection to where we came from as a people, and also to land, and to which is very much what we're destined to do, perhaps on our land in Eretz Yisrael. So there's a strong connection there. What was the catalyst for you and your wife Tamar to leave that life behind? I'm imagining it's so beautiful. Maybe not the most busy or hustle and bustle kind of life, but to leave that life behind and to make Aliyah. And was it a lifelong dream, or did something specific spark that journey?
So just to be clear, I grew up on the farm. I left the farm when I was probably around 16, and went out, got myself a job. And so when we pick up on the question here, I'm already in my 30s. I have a couple of kids. I'm living in that 40-mile away city. The city was called Christchurch. Kind of interesting. It's a city did have a major European cathedral sitting in the middle of it. So what was the catalyst for heading out to make such a change, to live in Eretz Israel? Well, I guess the simple answer is I have two daughters, tiny Jewish community, very slim chances that those two daughters would find and marry Jewish husbands. So that was one part of the catalyst. The other part is really my love for the land of Israel. You know, it's kind of an interesting part of our story that actually Israel came to us before we came to Israel. For several years in this initial phase, Israeli families started coming to our hometown. They were mostly young families who were taking a Shabbaton at the local university. And they typically came from Raphael. It was a major government high-tech arms organization. And they would come and do their Shabbaton at the university, and they were looking around for people to connect with. So after the first family, then came the second, and then through the years, we had the Israelis coming to us, spending time with us. You know, we were the only place in town with a sukkah, for example, and so they came to us. So by the time I went for my pilot trip to Israel, I already had friends in Israel who hosted us and helped us around and find us way around the country. So they're really the two features. We decided to pick up everything and go to Israel because we figured that if we couldn't make it work within 2 years, we would come back and live in Australia. New Zealanders can immigrate freely to Australia, so that was our kind of plan A, plan B. So that's the catalyst. That's how we got to being in Israel.
You told me before that your primary motivation for moving to Israel wasn't to become a rabbi, but simply to be in Israel. What does that mean to you on a gut level, just being in Israel?
As I'm sure many people listening are aware, history in our time, at least from my perspective, the history of the Jewish people and the reestablishment of the state of Israel, for me, is a miracle. Um, you know, my gut feeling was that I wanted to be part of that, and I wanted to plant my family and grow my family here in the land of Israel. Baruch Hashem, I have today 4 daughters and 8 grandkids. Bezrat Hashem, I will have more grandkids coming along, and so the reestablishment of the land of our fathers and the restoration of our people that resulted in our generation in a sovereign Jewish state after 2 millennia, I don't see that as an accident, a quirk of history. There's something much deeper to it. And, our sages say that living and breathing the Aliyah, the air of the land of Israel, makes one wise. I think I would kind of paraphrase that to the land. Being here, living here, breathing the air changes you, changes the way you think, the way you look at things. And today we live halfway between Jerusalem and Hebron, a couple of miles away from Ma'arat HaMakpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs. For me, this means so much to me, and this is where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, even though it wasn't really planned out.
It's beautiful that you're there and that you're flourishing the way that you are, and your family, your children, grandchildren, Bli Ayin Hara should continue. You did end up choosing to study for the rabbinate and ultimately to settle where you are in Judea, in the Har Hevron region. Why specifically, as opposed to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or the Galilee? Why are you where you are?
It reminds me of when we were going through preparing for the Aliyah. There was a shaliach, an emissary from Israel who was in New Zealand, and we consulted with him, and he said, you should go to Ra'anana. So Ra'anana is a very center of the country city with many immigrants from Jewish immigrants from Western countries. And we said, no, I think we want to go to Jerusalem. And he kind of didn't think that was a good idea. And then he said, by the way, you don't have enough money to make Aliyah. So with that anecdote to begin, I'm sure everyone's familiar of the words of Hashem to Avram Avinu. Avram, our forefather, said, leave your country, your family, your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. So you could ask, what does it mean I will show you? What, Avram didn't know where he's going? I'm pretty sure Avram knew where Eretz Canaan was, the land of Canaan was. So the I will show you, I think, expresses something deeper. And so this has been my experience. I had no idea what I was going to do in Israel. As I was a trained automotive engineer, and but that industry is very different in Israel than it is in New Zealand. Anyway, I somehow knew that God would open doors for us. So I decided at the very outset what I wanted to do is, because I had a very, I would say, very limited Jewish education, I wanted to begin by studying for a year in yeshiva. And I had an opportunity to do that. And so after spending 6 months in what's called the Merkaz Klita, an absorption center, we moved out 15 minutes south of Jerusalem to a town called Efrat. It's actually a city now. And there in Gush Etzion, that's the name of the area, there was a yeshiva, and they were willing to take on board, beginners like me. So the 1 year became 7 years, and um, so things open up when you come here that you would never expect. But Hashem said to Avram, "Will show you," and He showed us as well. In the latter part of my time in the yeshiva, my studies yeshiva, I moved from being in the beginners program to joining the kollel. Kollel is typically a more advanced, and people in the kollel and in this particular yeshiva were training for the rabbinate. So I was invited to join the kollel, and my chavruta, my study partner, was a Canadian who actually lived in the Har Hevron area. And he lived in this small town called Beit Haggai. And he said, "Look, come and visit. Why don't you come and live here?" It was another 20 minutes, 25 minutes further south from Efrat. We went to visit a few times, and then eventually we decided in my final year, I decided, listen, we'll leave the accommodation in the yeshiva, and we'll go and live in Beit Haggai. We bought a house there. There were a lot of empty houses. It was a bit far out for most people, but here was a small community, a small religious community who were committed to settling this part of the country and building here a town, by the way, which sits right over the southern exit from Hebron. Hebron today is an Arab city of about 250,000 people. And so we're kind of elevated on a sort of not exactly on a hilltop, but on a rise. And we look down on the southern entrance, and the a lot of traffic going in and out of Hebron. So that's how I got to study in the rabbinate, and that's how I got to live in the Har Hevron area.
After your time in America, kind of fast forwarding, and then taking you back, you returned to Israel and faced the challenge that many Israelis do. And you already referred to that because you've had previous training from New Zealand, but you faced the challenge of making a living. And you told me that you worked nights managing a call center and then for a high-tech company. How did this experience in the secular world, so to speak, especially working with international clients, how did that shape your perspective just as a rabbi and especially as an Israeli?
So you're right. We were in America as community rabbi in the Knesset Israel Torah Center, which is a small Orthodox Union community in Sacramento. And when we came back, well, it's kind of a little story in its own. I'll just preface my response here with the story. Every year I would travel from Sacramento to Israel to an international rabbinic conference. And in my last journey, I would travel backwards and forwards, no questions, nothing happened. In my last journey, they stopped me, and as I entered the US, and they said to me, "Where's your letter?" And I looked at them. I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, you have to have a letter from your community to say you're still working there." And I said, "Oh, no one told me. I've been going backwards and forwards every year. No one said anything." So then they said, "Oh, come with us." So they took me off to the side room, and I thought, "Oh, what's going to go on? What's happening here?" And it was like a court. There were 3 people sitting at a bench in front, and one of them said, "Well, have you got anything that proves that you're still employed with the community in Sacramento?" And I racked my brains. I had nothing. And then I had a thought popped in my head. Well, I have a community credit card. Does that help? So I gave them the credit card, and they said, "Yeah, this is fine." So they stamped my visa for another 2 years. So nothing happened, but that was border control. We had already decided to come back to Israel when we were contacted by ICE. Sure, they're in the news now. So this was long before the current things that are going on. And ICE told us we were overstayers and we had to get out of the country. and we had 30 days. Now, we got that letter late, so we only had a couple of weeks. In any case, cut the long story short, we were kind of leaving but got thrown out by ICE. So we kind of have some empathy for what's happening in the country in America right now. Although it was a very strange story, one of so many that I have. So we got back to Israel, and again, I had no idea, as you mentioned, what am I going to do? How am I going to make a living? But again, I was reminded that, and I believed that somehow God would open the doors. My old chavruta, my old learning partner, contacted me. He said, "Hey, I'm working in this call center. They're looking for people. You could come here and work for a bit until you find out what you want to do." So I I joined this call center, and I was working there for a few months, and I got promoted to a more high level team. And then one evening, as I'm about to set off to work, by the way, this is working nights. I was working from 10 in the evening to 8 in the morning, American hours, and I got a call from the CEO of the company, and he said, I'm at the King David Hotel. Could you come and meet me there before you go to the office? So I thought it was very strange. So I go to meet him there, and he's there with the CFO, and they said to me, "Listen, we want to hire you as the manager of the call center. We're going to fire the current manager. We want to make sure that you're willing to take the job before we do." So a door opened. Here am I on this low paid job, and now suddenly I'm given a lot of responsibility and a much higher paid job. I worked in that company for approximately 7 years. It was an American company working out of Israel, working with mostly people in the Jewish community in America, all over the country. One thing led to another, and eventually that job finished. And I had a brief period in between, a few months actually, between this and the next job. The next job I came into was the company I work for still is an Israeli high-tech company, and this was very different. For the first time now, I'm in an environment where people are speaking Hebrew. I'm in an environment where it's the Israeli high-tech culture. I started at the bottom. They were just beginning to launch their high-tech product, and they employed me basically to begin selling the product and to eventually build a call center, which I did. I've been there for 10 years now in the same company. Eventually, I built a second call center for customer support success, which I'm running to this day. What can I tell you? The corporate high-tech world in Israel is a microcosm of, in my experience, a microcosm of Israel, of the Jewish people and the culture in Israel. I worked with Jews, with Arabs. I worked with religious and secular. I worked with new immigrants, long-time citizens, people who are older, although many were much younger than me. What I learned there is that the high-tech culture, at least in this particular company, was a culture of respect. There was a mezuzah on every door. It's a 20-story building. We at that time had 4 floors. There's a beautiful synagogue on the entrance floor, and so people would break for minyanim. The observant people break for minyanim. Others, there was no pressure. They didn't, everything the company did involving food was kosher. The Shabbat is observed. No one works on Shabbat. Some people might work on the side, but no one's obligated to work on Shabbat. The holidays are celebrated. On this next week on Sunday, the CEO called us in because now he wants to, they call it Haramot Kosot, raising the glasses in honor of the beginning of the new year. And so all the national holidays are celebrated right across the corporate environment. And it doesn't matter if you're religious, not religious, that's the environment. And You hear many languages also. Well, Hebrew happens to be the common language, but I have people on my team who spoke French, German, Italian, um, even Japanese, Chinese. So it's a very unique experience, and I think for me, uh, to conclude the answer to the question, um, this was my experience of Israel. This is a family. This is not just another company. This is not just another country. This is the family of the Jewish people. And so that, I think, is, you know, in terms of relationship to Israel, really shaped my thinking in the way I am today.
It's amazing to be in a company like that you mentioned, with the different people of different walks of life, backgrounds, and even many of our listeners may not realize that more than 20% of Israel are Arab, of Israelis are Arab, and probably as many as 30% of Israelis are not Jewish. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about what it's like for Jews and for Arabs? And when I say Arabs, I mean many of those people identify as under the label Palestinian, whatever they call themselves, they're Arabs, and they're working with Jews. First of all, it doesn't sound like apartheid. You've got these people working together. But can you tell us, is there a lot of tension? Is it, what's the rapport like, and what's the environment like for Jews and Arabs to work together?
Everyone's treated the same. They have the same work conditions, eat the same food, um, and also the Arabs are not monolithic. They're Christian Arabs. They're observant Muslim Arabs who wear the women wear the hijab. There are others who are more secular, and also the guy who was in charge of the support team. They cleaned and they provided all the food and everything for all the staff. He was a Palestinian Arab. His mother, however, was South American from, I'm just trying to scrape my brains to remember here, I think maybe Venezuelan. So his father was an Arab Palestinian, grew up in Israel, and his mother came from outside. So they also have, a mixture. They there was a team of girls who were working with. We also had markets amongst the Arab community, also amongst the Arab community outside of Israel proper, and what we call Yehuda and Shomron, and they were selling our product into those communities. So it was all done in Arabic, and one of the women was, you know, hair out, wearing jeans, very, very nice person. The other, also very nice, was, with a hijab and, wearing much more modest clothing. So, uh, and everyone got on well together. There was no tension. Though I have very, very close friendship with all of them who worked with us.
Really important, I think, for everyone to hear and to understand. And I remember when you were sojourning, if you will, in Sacramento for that time period, and you were enlightening us at that time about what it was like in what people call the West Bank of the Jordan River, Yehuda and Shomron, and in those historic places where our people have lived for millennium. And what it's really like, because if you read the news, it seems like there are militant people just constantly at each other's throat. But what you told us then and what you're telling us today is that there are some deep relationships. Yes, there is tension, but there are also a tremendous cooperation and human interaction and collaboration even. And I'm happy to hear that that is still your experience, even in the middle of this war that we're in. And we hope that the war comes to an end soon. But I think that that's also important for our listeners to hear, that in the middle of the war, you have Jewish people, Muslims, Christians, Arabs, all sorts of people from all around who are working together and respecting each other and living dignified lives. So I'm just curious also, about the community that you live in Beit Haggai. What is it like to live in such a small, tight-knit community? You told me there's about 100 families. What's it like to live in that area?
Yeah, if I could just kind of give a little bit of a paint a little bit of picture, it's around 120 families. It's a very rural environment. For me growing up on the farm, this was more at home for me than living in a big city. Um, the other thing about it is it's Hebrew speaking community. It's not that there aren't people here who speak other languages, but that's what everyone speaks. And um, the other thing is it's really a community. When you live in the big cities in Israel, for most of our people listening, probably are connected to some Jewish community somewhere. It's not the same in Israel. The Jewish community isn't kind of centralized around a synagogue in the big cities. People might go to prayer in a synagogue, but their community is really their family and extended family. That's the focus. So it's kind of quite different than outside of Israel. But here in these small towns, you do really find that experience of community. The people that live here are what are called in Israel dati leumi, national religious. What that means is that they're people who, in their education, have spent, at least the guys especially, would spend time learning in the yeshiva, and then part of their time they will be training and serving in the army. The woman typically, some of them will go to the army, but most of them will do what's called shirut leumi, which is called national service. So my kids all did this, and they volunteer and work in various institutions. For example, they could be working in a childcare center. They could be working helping new immigrants. Two of my daughters actually worked in an organization called Aliyah, and they help handicapped kids. So those are the kinds of things, the kind of background of the people that live here. It's very family oriented, but it's also very mixed. There are Ashkenazim, there's Faradim, there are Mizrachim, there are Yemenites, Bnei Menashe, who are Jews who came from what's used to be called Burma, right next to India, and so there's a big mixture of people. Many different languages are spoken behind the scenes. Could be French, could be Russian, could be English, but most people don't have. My family is unique in that we both speak English. The other families usually has one Israeli partner, and so the common language is Hebrew. It's a community that has a daycare center. My wife worked for years with the little kids. She got to know everyone because even though her Hebrew wasn't great, she connected through their children. And she's even today still part-time working there, and she's the kind of the grandma of the whole yeshuv. Everyone knows her better than they know me. We have a very large. This is relatively new. A very large community center, which is a Torah center, which is two big synagogues. One is Faradi and one is Ashkenazi. They're right next to each other in the same building. There is an in-house kollel. It's a higher level yeshiva for dayanut, for training people to become judges, religious judges. We have a large community hall. There's a soccer field. There's a basketball court. There's a youth movement, B'nai Akiva, which is very strong. And so that's us, very close together, celebrating together, mourning together when that happens. Most people work either in the general area of Har Hevron or commute to Beersheba to work or to Jerusalem to work. Another common thing is everyone participates in guard duty. Okay, this would be something, I guess, for most people a little strange. The yeshuv, the town, is not surrounded by a fence. Many small towns are, but we have no fence. We have like an electronic system around. It's a radar system and cameras, and so part of being involved in security is everyone shares the responsibility, because security has to go all night. We're a stone's throw from Hebron, and as I mentioned earlier, it's 250,000 um, uh, people in the city, Arabs, and inside there have been many cells from Hamas and other terrorist organizations. Um, so just in terms of where it is exactly, we're 15 minutes drive to the nearest town that has most services, Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba is a city right next to Hebron. It's Jewish, and there you have supermarkets, chemists, doctors, everything you need. Bank, post office, and the commute to Jerusalem Beersheba is around 50 minutes, um, depending on traffic. So that gives some kind of picture of what it's like to live here. Um, just to just conclude that just yesterday we had a celebration because the community is expanding. We have two hilltop areas now, which we have put there what they call in Hebrew caravanim. So not really caravans; they're actually portable homes, and that's how you start a new neighborhood typically. And people move in. My daughter and her husband are moving in with some young couples into a new group of 10. And alongside that, we have just got authorization now to build another neighborhood of 52 houses, 52 housing units. It'll take a year or so to build, but we're small but expanding. Hope that gives some idea of what it's like to live here.
It sounds beautiful and exciting at the same time, and very different from what we hear on the news, because the news would say that they would portray your home as being in the West Bank, a place of constant tension and conflict. Does that portrayal match your? It doesn't sound like it does, but tell us how that does or doesn't match your lived reality, and what do you think the media happens to get right, even, and what does it profoundly get wrong?
A friend of mine a long time ago came to live in Israel from New York and Brooklyn. So he I think gives the best anecdote. He said, his family would worry. He married with young kids and would worry about him. And he said, it's so funny, in New York, we lived behind multiple locked doors. It was dangerous for our kids to be out on the street at night, dangerous for us to be out at night. But here in Israel, the kids are running around in the street without their parents, and it can be 10, 11, even 12 o'clock at night. No one feels unsafe. So it's just as an anecdote, but in terms of where we live in particular, in general, Yesha or Yehuda and Shomron, as it's called, there are a lot of there's a big how we say slant in the media and a lot of misinformation. For example, you may have heard a lot about the violence, Jewish violence, Jewish youth, Hilltop youth violence against Palestinians. It makes the news. It's a big headline, and even the president saying, "Oh, we got to stop this." The truth is, it's not true. There's an organization called Regavim who monitor this, and the incidents. Their information and their data comes from the police, and it also comes from the UN. So what they discovered is that the UN data, in the UN data bank, an incident by settlers could be a speeding fine or a car accident. That's included in their data as being, a settler incident. And I'm not saying that there aren't incidents that happens where there's actually conflict between some of the young people and Palestinians, but it's not. It's very rare. It's not common. So the imagery is totally false. So this is a big challenge for us because unfortunately we have also people in Israel. We would say leftist, extreme leftist people in Israel who also it's in their interest to promote this picture, and so outside you can understand, well, who's giving us the right information? Some Israelis say this, some Israelis say that. So I'm just telling you my experience from living here. This is very rare, and typically the violence that happens is usually the other way around. It's usually uh, triggered by Arabs, usually young Arabs, attacking people working here in agriculture and so on. But again, these are not so common, and they're rare incidents.
Good for our listeners to hear that, to put into perspective, especially somebody who's on the ground in what the media refers to as the West Bank. And you can hear what it's really like. And I have to concur, because I've been all over the land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria, what the media calls the West Bank. And I tell people it's so much safer than just about anywhere I've ever been in the United States. I concur with what you said about children being able to I mean, I remember when I was a kid, and definitely when you were a child, being able to just live freely and to not be watched like a hawk constantly by parents who are nervous about crime and mishaps. I mean, that's really what it's like in Israel. In fact, I was there in 2023, right before the war, with my son, and we were even in Jerusalem, and I saw very young children, first grade, kindergarten, walking home from school unaccompanied by any adults. And that's virtually unseen in the United States, unfortunately, today, and in many parts of the Western world. I kind of want to get deeper into the conflict a little bit and your perspective, the big picture here, because we've got conflict. We also want to know what the future is going to be like. This is the question that many are hesitant to ask. From your perspective, what is the core of the conflict between Jews and Arabs in the region? And flowing from that, what kind of solution, if any, do you see as viable for the long term?
This is a much more challenging question to answer because it requires a knowledge of history, which from my observation, most people do not have. I'm talking about most people, even people living in the Jewish community, do not have a good perspective of history. And so in terms of the conflict and its future, the biggest challenge with that we face right now is we're viewed as colonizers. We're participating in an illegal occupation, especially if you live where I live, that was stolen land from the Arab residents. But this is only able to take root because people do not know the details. Jews are indigenous. We're from Judea. Judea, that's the connection. And the land on which the kinds of towns that I live in is built on is not private land. Yes, it's true. Sometimes there's a dispute about where the private land ends and where the state lands start. But in general, Jewish communities are on hilltops because the private land is in the valleys. That's the arable farming land. And the state lands are on the hilltops, which is kind of rocky and very, not suitable for agriculture. And so that's kind of in terms of the concept. You've heard of the green line, I'm sure, but over here we have something called the blue line. The blue line marks the border between private Arab lands and state lands. So communities in these areas are built on state land, not on private land. There is also, by the way, something that people may not be aware. There's much land here that is not owned by anybody. Okay, so it's that opens the door for a lot of other issues that come up. But if I could, answer your question more directly in terms of the core of this conflict, um, the core of this conflict, in my understanding, is the conflict between Islamic values and the existence of a sovereign Jewish state. Since 1948, Israel accepted the partition plan, and even though they didn't really like it, but they would take what they could get, and they established a state, an independent state with its own government, ultimately its own military, its own laws, and as long as the Islamic community view us as somehow colonizers who don't belong here, then this problem will not go away anytime quickly. Since 1948, we have had ongoing wars, and those wars are and they're not about the territory, whether there's any right or not right to the territory. They're arguments about the territory in the sense that Jews cannot live in this territory under their own sovereignty. That's the argument. So when people say from the river to the sea, that's what they're promoting. They're promoting the idea that there should be no Jewish state here. Now, even if they're more moderate and say, yeah, but Jews could live here, but they can't have sovereignty. Why? Because sovereignty belongs to Islam. Since this territory, all of it, including Tel Aviv, was once under the Caliph of the Ottoman Empire. So therefore, it's considered Islamic territory, and it's an affront to their community that we exist here. So add to that the anti-Semitic trope that goes along with all of this, then there is a lot of potential conflict there, and it's not going to go away in a hurry because it's really a cultural conflict and a religious conflict. I'm sure that in terms of what's the solution, well, as you can tell, I'm not super optimistic, but one solution would be, I think, an ideal solution would be the reformation of Islamic values. Now, we've seen this historically with Christianity. Christianity, in its own definition, defines itself as a religion that grew out of Judaism but replaces it. Okay, we only exist to kind of prove the validity of Christianity. There's been some changes to that in more modern times. Christianity has gone through its own conflicts, its own wars, and they've kind of mellowed out a little bit in terms of that perspective. Islam has not gone through those. There are imams who do hold a different perspective, but they're very rare. They hold that. And the Quran actually says this, that Israel does have a historic right to be here, but we blew it. So they coming and building a state here, you are spitting in our eye. So this is reflected by the Arab Leagues. Following the War of Independence of 1948, the Arab League's classic three no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations with Israel. Why? It's because that's the ground they stand on. The Islamic values, we shouldn't be here. Now, it's true that the Avraham Accords have demonstrated there are some cracks in that. There's some cracks in that position. However, it's very fragile, as recent events, Qatar, has shown that those Avraham Accords are very, very fragile, and that underneath there still is a certain level of that, okay, maybe we're willing to have kind of economic relations with you, but don't think that means we think you deserve to be here. So I don't know. They're my two kind of things. Maybe the Avram Accords will become something. Maybe there'll be a reformation in Islamic values, which could change things. But I'm not overly optimistic.
It makes sense, and perhaps if there is more success in this current war that we find ourselves, maybe there will be some sort of silver lining somewhere. But I share your pessimism, although I do believe that Hashem is really calling the shots here, and there's been so many miracles, as you pointed out, that you noticed, thinking back to 1967 and thinking back to just everything that's happened with Jews returning to our ancestral land. And by the way, not all of us, there was always a Jewish presence, as we know, in the land, even in the darkest times. And our listeners, as a side, should be, and we've talked about this before, should be aware that there are about 1 million refugees, Jewish refugees from Arab and Muslim countries who found their way to be permanently settled in their ancestral land in Israel, and they're the majority. So it's an incredible mixture, an incredible society, as you pointed out, and exciting and even positive relationship with many of the Arabs and Muslims who are living there, in spite of the ideology that you are referring to, and that we're in a sense haunted by. I want to talk more about values, and you and I have spoke about this a little bit in our last conversation privately. Having lived in New Zealand and the U.S. and Israel, you really have a unique perspective. Do you see a fundamental difference between Western values and Jewish values? Where do they align, and where do they diverge?
So I think it's a big topic, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But I think there's actually a famous book, or two books written. I've forgotten the name of the author. One's called The Jewish Mind, the other's called The Arab Mind. Um, Not directly connected to the question about Western values, but I think it's apropos because how we think about things is very much driven by our values, our value systems. And, Jewish values are the values based on the covenant that we have with Hashem that's outlined in the Torah and detailed in the Torah, and it's defined by Jewish law. This is also filled out and expressed in the Mishnah and the Talmud. And you could say we have a constitution already. It's a shame that Israel hasn't adopted it yet, but the so-called Aseret Divrot, the 10 words, the 10 commandments, are essentially our constitution. For our American listeners, you'll understand the implications of that. Constitution isn't the law, but it's the foundation on which everything is built. And so, from a Jewish perspective, that is where our Jewish values are derived. Western values, on the other hand, are essentially grow out of the Greco-Roman world. Okay, and that whole world is really the Western world. Was tremendously impacted by the arrival of Christianity, and Christianity brought with it, having originated in Judaism, its very kind of early beginnings, it brings with it some Jewish values, and so we hear the term Judeo-Christian often bandied around. It's not really a good way to describe, but there is a certain overlap. Why? Because the Christians brought the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures, and they also had stuck onto it their book. And so the Jewish values that do come through in Western society are often through the filter and prism of Christianity. So It's a difficult topic. It's a long topic, but I think just to draw attention to it, if you want to know what Jewish values are, open up the Tanakh and read it. Okay, you might find things there that are uncomfortable, but these are Jewish values, and uh, often I think part of the reason because we've been 2,000 years in exile, we've taken on board values that may be even good values, but they're not necessarily Jewish values. And I think it's important to make that distinction and spend some time and some thought in trying to understand what that means.
You are just kind of really getting to not only another chapter in this interview, but also just in your stage of life where you find yourself. You're nearing a retirement age, perhaps. Looking back on your decision to leave New Zealand for Israel. Okay, we're getting very close. Looking back on your decision to leave New Zealand for Israel, what has been the most rewarding part of that choice, and what has been the most unexpectedly difficult part of that choice?
So, as I said in the beginning of the interview, the one of the catalysts for coming to live here in Israel was my kids. You know, that my daughters should find Jewish husbands, that they should get a decent Jewish education. And so it's so rewarding to sit here and see, you know, that took place. You know, that my kids are all bilingual. Many of my grandkids are bilingual. They they all have good jobs. You know, my eldest daughter is a teacher. She teaches kids who are specially advanced. You know, they're ahead of their peers. My next daughter is a dental hygienist. My next daughter is a nurse in Shari Tzedek Hospital, and my next daughter is an interior designer. So they all have good careers, except for the youngest. They all have kids and husbands, and so for me, that is the greatest satisfaction, seeing what was, you know, a question, a dream, actually come to fruition in reality. In terms of the unexpectedly difficult, so it's an interesting one because I think to some degree what difficulties are connected to our expectations. You know, I came here with no expectations. I didn't know what I was going to do. And to my surprise, I expected many more challenges. I think I could say for me, the biggest challenge was dealing with bureaucracy on arrival in Israel. But that's really not so unexpected if you think about it. You're moving from one country and culture to another. And this is proven when we went to America, I had to deal with the same bureaucracy going into America from the American government. So this is not really a difficulty. I say it's a difficulty. It's not really unexpected. So I don't have any, for me personally, anything really unexpected. Thank God, you know, I've not had to face, you know, the loss of a family member due to terrorism or war, but I do have friends and neighbors who had. That would be unexpectedly difficult. But thank God, at this point, I don't have anything beyond some bureaucracy to complain about.
If you could give one piece of advice or one thought to a young Jewish person living chutz la'aretz, living outside of Israel, who may be contemplating their connection to Israel, what would it be?
The first thing to do is to learn your history, study your history. And I don't mean just the history of what happened since the Holocaust. I mean the history of our nation, which is already 3,000 years old. You got a book. If you don't read Hebrew, you can read it in English. The Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, they document the history of our nation. Many different writers, many different books, and you will read there what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be connected to the land of Israel. And of course, you should learn the modern history as well. But that's perhaps one part that maybe most Jewish schools give some time to. But it's not enough. Jewish history didn't start with Theodor Herzl. It started with Avram, actually, our forefather, who wasn't even Jewish in the modern sense of the word. And so, if you learn your history, you'll understand this is our indigenous homeland, and coming here to visit, to spend time, to get to know the land and the people here, based on that history, is the best thing you could do. And this is your homeland, and coming to understand this will make a difference. How you think about it, how you think about living here, and based on that history, those kind of expectations, you can be successful here.
Yossi, thank you so much for this honest and insightful conversation. It's really been an honor to reconnect with you and to have you on the Rabbi Avi show. My prayers for you and your family, that you should continue to have a lot of nachat, a lot of enjoyment, a lot of successes, a lot of just advancements, not only for your family, but for Klal Yisrael, and that we should come together for many more happy occasions in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Avi. Thank you for your time and your prayers.